I think everyone should experience the imposter syndrome, not suffer from it, but experience it if you're pushing hard enough.
You're listening to Overwhelmed Working Woman, the podcast that helps you be more calm and more productive by doing less. I'm your host, Michelle Gauthier, a former overwhelmed working woman and current life coach. On this show, we unpack the stress and pressure that today's working woman experiences. And in each episode, you'll get a strategy to bring more calm, ease, and relaxation to your life. Hi, friend. I don't know about you, but I am just not a huge fan of rules in general. And today I'm talking to Lauren Wittenberg Weiner. She is the author of a book called Unruly, and she knows exactly how to break the rules, but do it strategically. She built a company from $0 to $100 million in annual revenue in a space that has a ton of rules, government contracting, and then sold that company. When you listen today, you'll learn from Lauren how to spot the difference between a rule you need to follow and one you should question. Why imposter syndrome might actually be a good sign. That was a new perspective for me. And how rational optimism can help you make bold moves without being reckless. So whether you're running a business or managing a team or just trying to stop feeling guilty about missing spirit dress-up day at your kid's school, this conversation will give you permission and a plan to be a little bit more unruly in your own life. Lauren, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really happy to have you here. I just want to start off by saying that I read your book cover to cover and I really loved it. It's bold and it's smart, but it's practical. The thing that appealed to me right from the start was that like I just said, I don't like rules unless they make sense to me, which I feel like is a perfect fit because you're not saying just be a rebel. You're saying understand the rules and think about what you want to change within those rules, and then sometimes work on changing the rule itself. So it just really appealed to me, and I'm excited to share what you talk about in the book with our audience. But before we do, take just a minute and tell us a little bit about why you wrote Unruly and who you really wrote it for.
Yeah, so it's funny because I wrote Unruly after I sold my company, and I really honestly started writing it just as a therapy for me, right? I had been the CEO of this firm that we had grown from nothing to $100 million in annual revenue, and I was no longer the CEO. And there was a new CEO who was there, who was wonderful, but not me, and just very different than me. And so everything that he was doing, I was sitting there. Michelle, I literally at one point sat on my hands.
Oh, literal sitting on your
Literally
hands.
sat on my hands. Because I was like, oh my God, I have to not talk. And I'm not good at not talking, not surprisingly. And so I was trying to figure out, how did we get here? Everyone told us for years, you can't do it this way. You're going to fail. That's not how you do it. And inevitably, the way that we did it is why we did as well as we did. And so I was sitting there just trying to get my brain around it. And at first it was a couple of LinkedIn posts and a couple of maybe an op-ed here and there. And I was like, there's more here. I was typing and it just came out. And then I sat down, said, I think this actually is a book. So I called one of my mentors who has written now 5 New York Times bestsellers. And I said, I think I have a book in me. Do I have a book in me? Am I crazy? And he was like, we know you're crazy, right? But
And
yes, you have a book in you. And so he walked me through, and that's who wrote my foreword is Stan McChrystal. And he told me how he did it. And I'm like, yes, sir, but you're Stan McChrystal. I'm not. And it turned out worked exactly how he said I should try to do it. Put it out there. It's funny, as we've been working through the marketing of the book, he told me flat out, you were going to love every minute of writing the book and you were going to hate every minute of marketing the book. And he was entirely right. I love this stuff. I love talking to people about the contents, but the targeting, the marketing, figuring out the social media, all of that piece, it's awful to me. And so one of the things that we realized is we didn't have a target market, because is it women? Yes. Is it women in midlife? Gosh, yes, because that's where I am. And so I think it speaks to people in the same space that I am. It speaks to young women and women pivoting at different points in their careers, but it also speaks to, surprisingly enough, a bunch of military guys, because that's where I came out of, was the military milieu. That was actually one of the hardest things that we had to do, was figure out who are we targeting in this. And we ended up figuring out that there are just multiple messages And so when I'm talking to an overwhelmed working women group, there's a lot of different conversations that I have with them. Then tonight, I'm actually going and talking to military people, mostly guys, who are coming out of the military and transitioning into a civilian career. So those are different conversations, but they're the same underpinnings.
Yes. I don't know if you're a Kindle reader, but if you read on the Kindle, you highlight the stuff that you like, and then you can email yourself the document. And there were just so many little pieces, like even if you just took one thing away from it, that would really be good. So I think you're right. Like any audience could pick and choose from it. So just in general, to give everybody an idea of what we're talking about, essentially Lauren's company that she started and eventually very successfully sold did contracts with and for the government and the military. And so, from being a former Army wife, I know that the level of rules in the military is like off the charts, and
Yes.
everything is not optional. This is how you do it, this is how it's always been done, etc. There are a lot of examples regarding the military, but as I was reading it, I'm thinking, and there are ways that it is just done in corporate America
Hmm.
and as a business owner and
Hmm.
even as a life coach. Like these are the things that you follow as a mom, whatever. So there are these sets of rules anywhere that you're looking.
Yeah. So
Level.
the book is in 3 parts. It is know the rules, challenge the rules, and change the rules. And know the rules is really understand the written and the unwritten rules better than anyone else. Make sure that you truly understand what it says, what the expectations are, but you do that in order to be able to ask why or why not. So if you just say, I'm not going to do that, you're going to get yourself in trouble. If you just say, I'm going to blow through the rules and not worry about what the rules say, you're going to get yourself in trouble. But if you know the rules and you can turn around and say, but I don't have to do it that way. That's not the way that it has to be. Then you can really change the way that everyone expects you to do things or everyone else does things and really upend the way that you're going to go about whatever you're going about doing, right?
Yeah.
But then there are times when, look, and I think we know it now more than ever, the rules stop working. There's no space within the rules to do the right thing. And so that's when that third piece, that advocacy piece, or the mentorship piece, what I call the Sherpa piece, where you're bringing somebody along with you to change their path or to change the actual rules themselves.
Yes. When I'm thinking back on my career, and I think everybody listening can think of being up against some rules that weren't great for them, where they were just told this is how it is. I got to a point where I was the only woman at my level who didn't have a stay at home spouse or a live in nanny or both. And I wanted to work part time and still keep the team of people I had and not be working on days that they were working and all these things. And it was like, nope, we looked across the entire company with hundreds of thousands of people. Nobody is doing that. And so I feel like that's a good example of those are the rules. I understand the rules. I looked into it. Those rules were not really written down anywhere.
Right.
I think the unwritten rule was like, don't make yourself too big or ask for too much.
Yeah.
Like, get in line.
Yep.
Soldier without being in the military, get in line. And so I did have that experience of trying to push against those rules gently. What's your approach to when to question the rules? How do you know that you should question the rules or try to find what you call a hybrid solution?
Right. I think when you start hitting a wall, right, when you start saying, this isn't working for whatever reason. And I think, look, I grew up as a rule follower and then I turned into never a rule breaker, but this kind of unruly concept. But it took me a little while to realize push on only the rules that are going to actually make a difference, that are actually going to differentiate you. For a while, when we were starting the firm, we got onto this unruly track and we were like, we're going to do everything differently. And 95% of what we needed to do, it had a standard protocol and there was no reason to upend that standard protocol. But when there is something that is stopping you from doing what you need to do, in your case, stopping you from having the balance you needed to have with your work and your life, that became a stopping point. And most people will turn around and say, okay, I have to get off of this treadmill and say, wait a second, do I have to? Do I
Yeah.
really have to do it that way? Is there a different way to do this? And sometimes there's not. They could have turned to you and said, sorry, that is not the way that we do things. This is it. And then you figure out the next mountain to climb, the different mountain or the stream to paddle down or the hammock to lay in for a little while. But everyone has these expected mountains that you're climbing next to next. If you can figure out that's not going to work for you, then you start questioning, okay, but could I do something different than what the expectations are? I think you can get there when you're asking the right questions.
I just lucked out with a boss who was supportive of the idea. So it wasn't 100% like, oh, I made this happen. No, but I was in the right situation. I hopefully asked the right questions. And then to your point, after I was in that position, then I had lots of part time women on my team
Right.
to pay it forward, create that situation for somebody else. But I feel like I struggled through that. I would have loved to have your book. I would have loved to know how to do this and how to
Right.
work through that.
Right.
In your book, there were a couple standout things for me that we talk about a lot on this podcast. For
Mhm.
example, I really loved your take on imposter syndrome.
So I think everyone shouldn't experience the imposter syndrome, not suffer from it, but experience it if you're pushing hard enough. And I think there are three types of people who don't experience imposter syndrome. The first one is the one that's not pushing, and you're comfortable in that. That's okay sometimes, but recognize that if you're not experiencing that imposter syndrome, probably means you've put yourself in a very comfortable position where you're not necessarily growing. And then there are two other kinds of people who don't experience it. One of them, and there's a business owner here in town where I live who fits this, where he just had all of these big ideas and he was like, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And I was like, those things are really hard. How are you doing that? And he was like, no, it's not that hard. He didn't know what he didn't know, and he was too oblivious to recognize it. So he was confident with nothing underpinning it. And he did fine in a lot of things, but when it was complicated, when it was big, he would bring these things out and he would announce them, and then he would fail and it would just quietly go away. The more toxic one is the people who don't experience it because they're not introspective enough to recognize that they have a fragile ego. These, mostly guys, have these huge egos that are very fragile, and anytime something threatens their ego, they defend against it and they get very toxic. And so those don't make good leaders, right? They don't suffer from the imposter syndrome. Everyone around them suffers from their imposter syndrome. Right? In my mind, the imposter syndrome actually brings you to good questions. It brings you to an understanding that I don't know exactly what I'm doing here. Let me ask, let me figure it out. But it also is a great signal that you're pushing hard and doing the right thing.
Yes, I feel like women in big positions always have imposter syndrome. I feel like everyone I talk to does, myself included. It
Yep.
happens sometimes. And I love the way that you flip the script on it by saying, if you don't have imposter syndrome, it's not necessarily that you're doing something wrong, but you're just in a very safe position. And I also love just the subtle difference in the way that you described suffering with imposter syndrome and experiencing imposter syndrome. I just think that's such an important distinction that really changes the way that we can look at it. It takes courage to take the next step on anything, and you cannot get courage without having a little bit of fear in there. And it feels like that imposter syndrome is that little bit of fear that happens when you have the courage to take a role that is too big for you, in air quotes. And I love the story in the book when you were talking about your brother, how you told him, I can't get this job because I haven't done that. I can't get this job because I haven't done that. He's like, if you're getting a job where you have already done everything, what is the point of getting that job?
I had a conversation the other day with one of my friends, and there are some women who actually don't experience imposter syndrome for good reason. One of my good friends is a Black woman here in town, and we were talking about the experience of imposter syndrome for Black women. And because they know that they've had to work harder and longer and really proven themselves to get anywhere, they actually don't experience the imposter syndrome the same way, at least that I do, in that they know that they belong there.
They don't feel like they tricked somebody to get there.
Exactly.
Or
I feel like I tricked somebody. Somebody's going to discover me, and I'm ducking and covering at this point. But when I was talking to my friend Jessica about this, I was like, do you feel imposter syndrome? She's like, yeah. And then she's like, I don't think I feel it the same way you do. I'm worried somebody's going to think that I don't belong there.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And
but
so
she knows she does.
I want to borrow some of that absolute knowledge that I've busted my tush to get here. I deserve everything I got. And oh, by the way, because I'm pushing hard, now I'm feeling uncomfortable. But that feeling that somebody's going to discover you, that suffering is what we need to get away from.
Yes, yes, exactly. You can experience imposter syndrome without suffering from it.
Yes.
I love that take on it. And then the other thing that I wanted to call out was rational optimism, because as an optimistic person myself, who is sometimes accused of being Pollyanna, the term really stuck out to me. And so I was hoping you could explain what it is and how it's different than full on Pollyanna.
Yeah. So I'm a Pollyanna as well, or I have pieces of pessimism in me just from how I was raised. But for the most part, I am by nature an optimist. So I run through in the book this exercise between pessimism and optimism. The paralysis of pessimism is a problem, but the Pollyanna of optimism is also a problem.
Mm.
And I talk about in the book, my daughter was going off to high school and she didn't immediately get into the high school that we wanted her to get into. And I ran down this whole pessimistic,
There goes her whole life type situation.
I got her to homeless and on drugs
Okay.
in 3 steps, right?
Oh,
And my
exactly.
daughter is not going to be homeless and on drugs. But there is this doom spiral that pessimists go down, that optimists don't go down. And I think it's actually useful to go down this doom spiral without the panic inducing pieces of the doom spiral. Go through an entire what's the worst that can happen concept and brainstorm everything that can go wrong. Because if you can brainstorm everything that can go wrong, number one, you can figure out ways to mitigate as much as possible. And number two, you can then make a reasonable decision as to whether or not the risk is worth the reward.
Yes.
And so it's not saying always go down and do it anyway. That's not rational optimism. You might be way too optimistic. But it's also not saying stop and don't do anything. It is find the way to mitigate as much risk as possible, find a way to quantify as much of that risk as possible to see if I've got this that happens, and this could be really bad, but then this and then this would have to happen. 1, 2, 3, and 4 would have to happen. And each one of those is infinitesimally small in terms of the probability of it happening. The probability of the catastrophic happening is almost nothing. Being able to rationalize through whether or not this is a risk you're willing to take and how to take that risk most effectively is the point of rational optimism.
Yes, yes, exactly. I've heard a similar concept called strategic pessimism as well. Like I'm thinking strategically through the worst case scenario, but I like the title rational optimism.
Look, there's actual research that shows pessimists are right generally in their estimations, and optimists do better in life overall.
Yeah.
So would you rather be right or would you rather get to the right outcome?
Yeah, I'll take the optimistic path. And I feel like that can get a bad name because it's like everything's always going to be okay. No, it's not.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it is going to be. And if it's not, you can believe that you will be able to figure out what that next step is.
And it's incredible what your mindset can actually do for you. Again, there's great research in if you believe that it's not going to happen or if you believe that it is going to happen, you're right in both cases
Yeah.
because it's your mindset that's going to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, the last thing I want to touch on is guilt and responsibility and boundaries. And in the book, you say that no one can dish out guilt like a Jewish mother. And since you have a Jewish mother and you are a Jewish mother, that you were very well versed in guilt. And it's funny because I grew up Catholic and we say the same thing, but we sub in Catholic
Totally.
instead of Jewish. I feel like Jewish moms and Catholic moms are really similar in this. So you're saying that you got a heavy dose of guilt and that culturally speaking, we both grew up in those kind of environments. So why do you think high achieving women carry so much guilt and what should we do about it?
Oh, this is like the $1 million question. Look, if you are trying to be the best you can be, you're going to have guilt, particularly interpersonal guilt, if you don't meet the standards that you need. But I think it goes along with the perfectionism that I talked about in the book, in that there are things that you can do that are perfect and need to be perfect. There are very few of those. There are lots of things that you can do not perfectly, and there are lots of things that you don't have to do at all. And so I talk about ruthlessly curating your priorities, which I think is really important. When my kids were tiny, I hated every spirit week at school. It would kill me every time. And I'm like, these stupid at camp and then at preschool and then this. And they would have these ridiculous days. And some of the moms, because it was their priority, would have these elaborate costumes. And it was great and wonderful. And I would forget until the morning of, or inevitably, actually, one of our good friends, thankfully, knew me well enough that she would just buy a second costume and
Oh, now
bring it,
that's a true friend. Yes.
right? Still my daughter's best friend to this day. But I would look at this and I'd be like, this is not my priority. Even if I wanted it to be my priority, couldn't have been my priority. But it wasn't my priority. This is not how I get joy. They didn't matter to my kids. My
Mhm.
kids are probably going to go to therapy for plenty of things. Not being in a costume for Spirit Week wasn't one of them.
Yeah.
Right? I had to be okay with not having the perfect Instagram picture of my kid looking as cute as everyone else's kid. I have to be okay with saying, that's really adorable. I'm so glad your kid looks so cute, and actually enjoy it for them and not care about it for me.
Yeah, exactly. I think to your earlier point about just the way that you're thinking about things, you could spend your whole day and be distracted at work and upset that you forgot the costume, or you could be like, okay, it's not that big of a deal. Like carrying the guilt around is just going to screw up the whole rest of your day.
And it doesn't matter. Again, when it matters, make it matter, right?
Yeah.
If it's really going to matter, I am going to do everything in my power. That is my priority. And I'm going to ruthlessly curate that priority. But then sometimes what ends up happening is this just happened to me this summer with the book. I was out doing my book tour, and the book tour was the highest priority. We managed the kids' stuff so that we could make sure they were taken care of so I could go do my book. And then my mom got sick and passed. And it was like, nope. As much as this was a priority, and it still is a priority to me, it couldn't be my highest priority at
Yeah.
that point. And so ruthlessly curating those priorities is a constant evolution. Even when something is a priority to you, if something else takes over, then that's what takes over, and you've got to be okay with it.
Yes. Yes. I feel like you just have to believe that you're always doing your best to try to prioritize and give your attention where it's needed. Okay, so normally I ask the same two questions to everyone at the end of the podcast, but I've actually already had you on as a guest and I asked you those questions. So I have a slightly tweaked version of
Yeah.
it, which is what is something that you do to be unruly in a small way?
I think it is just honestly giving myself grace. I get on these treadmills because all of us do, and I will start listening to the voices either like actually in my head or the people around me who are parroting what I'm supposed to do. And I will literally stop myself when I start getting spun up on this and go, stop, unruly. What is my priority? Do I want this? And it is so hard to get off the treadmill. It is so hard to stop listening to what other people think you should be doing.
Mhm.
And so I think that's the biggest thing that I do on a day-to-day basis is stop myself and say, is this me or is this someone else who's telling me that I have to do this?
Yeah, I think that's the perfect takeaway that anyone listening can take as their unruly move for the day is just to remember that what someone else wants you to do is not your rule. And
Yes.
do you want to do that? Or do you
Yes.
have a different priority for yourself? I love it. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I hope everybody goes out and reads the book. So tell us where we can find it, where we can find more information.
So you can get it anywhere. You can get it on Amazon and Books A Million, or you can go to my website. We've got all sorts of fun stuff around book clubs. I've got a book club guide that if people buy the book and come back to me, I've got a book club guide they can use. We've got some talks. I'm giving talks for D1 women athletes. So lots of really cool how to be unruly as an athlete or how to use your athletic background to succeed elsewhere in life. So you can go onto my website and find how to get in touch with us, and we can create something for your group or your organization, your company around the book that I've been
Yeah,
really
that sounds
excited
fun. I
about.
used to run the women's network and I would have loved to do a book club and just gotten this for everybody at my office. I love that idea. Okay, great. Tell them what your website is and we'll link it in the show notes as well.
It is laurenwittenbergweiner.com. It's a very long name. It's my German husband and my German father, but laurenwittenbergweiner.com. And I'm on all the socials and I'm on all the places.
Thank you so much for being here with us. It was great to talk to you, and I wish you much continued success with your book, and I loved it. So thanks for coming on and talking
Thank
to
you
us
so
and
much.
sharing all your nuggets. All
Thanks
right.
so much.
Thank you for listening to the Overwhelmed Working Woman podcast. If you want to learn more about my work, head over to my website at michellegothier.com. See you next week.